"Well, I'll be," he said, chewing slowly. That's actually pretty darn good." He took another much more enthusiastic bite. "Hey, Mel, this thing's got a kick. Tastes a little like your chili." Word of mouth spread. A few more regulars, seeing Earl's enthusiastic endorsement, decided to try it. By the end of the day, they had sold out of the special. The next day, people came in asking for it. They sold out by 2 o'clock. By the end of the week, the Meltdown Burger was the most popular item on the menu. Mel watched dumbfounded as people he'd never seen before. Young people, people in business suits, even a few cyclists in spandex came into his diner and ordered a vegetarian burger. One afternoon, Mel was standing by the grill when Danny brought him a small plate with a single, perfectly cooked Meltdown Burger on it. "You should try one," Danny said quietly. "See what you think." Mel stared at the burger. It was his greatest fear and his greatest success all on one plate. He grumbled, he scowled, but he picked it up. He took a small, defiant bite. He chewed, he swallowed. A complex series of emotions played across his face: shock, disbelief, and finally a grudging, almost imperceptible nod of approval. "It's not bad," he conceded, trying to sound nonchalant. "For a thing with no meat in it." He took another bigger bite. "Needs more salt, though." It was the highest compliment he was capable of giving. Chapter 35, Ampere's new menu. The success of the Meltdown Burger was a turning point. It didn't turn Mel's Diner into a health food emporium overnight, but it opened the door to change. Slowly, cautiously, the menu began to evolve. A grilled chicken salad was added, then a veggie omelet. Danny even convinced Mel to start buying his produce from a local farm instead of the wholesale warehouse, arguing correctly that fresh tomatoes actually tasted like tomatoes. Vera's vision, once a source of conflict, had become a quiet revolution. She reinstated her compost bucket, and this time no one complained. Her recycling bins were used by everyone, even Mel, who would toss his beer bottles into the glass bin with a theatrical sigh as if making a great sacrifice for the planet. The diner itself seemed to breathe a little easier. The new customers brought a fresh energy, a new vibrancy that mingled with the comfortable familiarity of the old. The place was busier, louder, and more alive than it had been in years. One evening after a particularly frantic dinner rush, the 5 of them sat at the counter, exhausted but satisfied, sharing a pot of coffee. The new handwritten menu board hung on the wall behind them, a testament to their journey. "You know," Alice said, looking around the diner, "I think Cecil Farmington would be surprised if he came in here now." "I'd still serve him the old meatloaf," Mel grumbled, but there was no heat in it. A slow smile spread across his face. "But I might offer him a side of quinoa." The laughter that followed was easy and genuine. The house once divided was whole again, stronger and more resilient than before. It was still Mel's Diner, a haven of grease and comfort. But now it also had a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of kale, and a whole new future. Part 6, Alice's Echo Chapter 36, An Unexpected Letter. The rhythm of the diner settled into a new, more harmonious groove. The success of the Meltdown Burger had opened a door to a future Mel had never imagined, one that included fresh vegetables and customers under the age of 50. Danny had become a fixture in the kitchen, his quiet competence, a steadying presence. The daily drama continued, of course. Vera's ongoing attempts to unionize her hamsters, Jolene's scathing reviews of Mel's coffee, but it was the familiar, comfortable drama of a family that had found its footing. For Alice, this period of relative peace was a welcome respite. She watched with pride as Tommy navigated his college life, excelling on the basketball court and in his studies. The diner, once a temporary stop on her journey back to a singing career, had become the anchor of her world, a place of unexpected stability and deep affection. Then on a quiet Thursday morning, the past arrived in a thin, pale blue envelope. The mail had just come, and Alice was sorting through the usual stack of bills and junk mail for Mel. Tucked between a flyer for discount plumbing and a postcard from Mel's cousin Wendell featuring a picture of a rare Bolivian tree frog stamp was a letter addressed to her. The return address made her heart stop. It was from Plainfield, New Jersey, from her late husband's parents. She hadn't heard from them in years, not since the flurry of angry, grief-stricken phone calls after Donald's fatal trucking accident. She slid her finger under the flap, her hands trembling slightly. The letter was brief and formal. Her in-laws, Frank and Eleanor Hyatt, were on a cross-country trip in their new RV. They would be passing through Phoenix in a few days' time. They wanted to see her. But most of all, they wanted to see their grandson, Tommy. Alice sank onto a stool, the letter clutched in her hand. The familiar smells of coffee and bacon suddenly seemed to fade, replaced by the ghost of her mother-in-law's perfume, a scent she associated with judgment and quiet disappointment. The piece she had so carefully constructed felt as fragile as a pane of glass, and a large stone was hurtling toward it. Chapter 37, The Weight of Memory. The news of the Hyatts' impending visit cast a long shadow over Alice. Her relationship with them had always been strained. Frank, a retired accountant, was a quiet, stoic man who had never understood his son's wanderlust. But Eleanor had been the true source of the friction. She had viewed Alice not as a daughter-in-law, but as the woman who had enabled Donald's worst impulses. In Eleanor's eyes, Donald, with his handsome face and beautiful singing voice, could have been somebody. He could have gone to college, gotten a respectable job. Instead, he'd met Alice, a fellow dreamer, and they'd hit the road chasing a naive fantasy of a singing career. When that dream faded and Donald had taken the trucking job to support his young family, Eleanor had seen it as a profound failure, a failure she laid squarely at Alice's feet. His death on the highway had cemented her resentment into a hard, unforgiving bitterness. "What's wrong, honey?" Jolene asked, noticing Alice's pale face and distracted air. "You look like you just found out Mel's chili is a renewable resource." Alice explained about the letter, her voice low. "I haven't seen him since the funeral. Eleanor, she always made me feel like I was a footnote in a story that was supposed to be much grander." Vera, overhearing, rushed over her face a mask of concern. "Oh, Alice, that's terrible. You must practice positive visualization." She grabbed a napkin and a pen. "Let's write down some affirmations. I am a competent and loving mother. My past does not define my present. How about my in-laws are a pain in the keister?" Jolene suggested, earning a disapproving look from Vera. She turned to Alice. "Listen, you don't have to see them if you don't want to. It's been years. You don't owe them anything." But Alice knew it wasn't that simple. "They're Tommy's grandparents," she said the words, heavy with obligation. "He has a right to know them. And maybe I need to do this for me. I'm tired of feeling like that scared 20-year-old widow they remember. I'm not that person anymore." A look of resolve settled on her face. She would see them, but she wouldn't go to their hotel or meet them at some neutral, sterile restaurant. She would invite them to the diner. She would face the ghosts of her past on her own turf in the place where she had built her new life, surrounded by the loud, chaotic, and fiercely loyal family she had chosen for herself. Chapter 38, Staging the Battle. When Alice told Mel her plan, she expected him to complain about the cost of feeding extra mouths or the inconvenience of hosting a family reunion during business hours. Instead, he surprised her. "Your in-laws, huh?" he said, wiping his hands on his apron. A strange, almost protective look crossed his face. "The ones who think you're not good enough for their son." Alice nodded. "All right," he said, his voice taking on the tone of a general planning a military campaign. We'll show 'em what a first-class operation this is." He turned to the kitchen. "Danny peel some real potatoes. We're making fresh mashed potatoes tonight. Vera, polish the good silverware, the ones that aren't bent. Jolene, for once in your life, try not to insult the customers." Mel, in his own gruff way, understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a performance. It was a defense of Alice, and by extension, a defense of the diner and everyone in it. He was treating the impending visit not as an intrusion, but as an inspection from a rival general, and he was determined that Mel's diner would pass with flying colors. The afternoon was a blur of preparation. The diner was scrubbed to a shine it hadn't seen in years. Vera set the designated booth with a paper towel and ketchup bottle centerpiece that she called Industrial Rustic. Mel, true to his word, began to prepare a meal that went far beyond his usual repertoire. He was making his mother's pot roast a dish reserved for the most sacred of occasions. The aroma that filled the diner was rich and comforting, a stark contrast to the anxiety churning in Alice's stomach. Tommy arrived from campus just as they were finishing. Alice had explained the situation to him over the phone, and he seemed more curious than nervous. "So what are they like?" he asked, stealing a carrot from Mel's prep station. "Your grandfather is a quiet man," Alice said carefully, "and your grandmother, well, she has very high standards." "Don't worry, Mom," Tommy said, putting a comforting arm around her. "We've got this." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the diner floor, a large, pristine RV pulled into the parking lot. The Hyatts had arrived. Alice took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and prepared for battle. Chapter 39, The Dinner Inspection. Frank and Eleanor Hyatt were exactly as Alice remembered them. Frank was a small, neat man whose beige windbreaker seemed to be a permanent part of his body. Eleanor was tall and thin, her silver hair perfectly coiffed her expression, one of polite, unyielding appraisal. They walked into the diner and stopped their eyes, scanning the room. It was clear from their faces that Mel's diner did not meet their high standards. Alice Eleanor said, her voice cool and precise. "It's been a long time." She offered a cheek for a kiss that was as brief and cold as a winter frost. The dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Mel's pot roast was by any objective measure delicious, but Eleanor dissected every bite as if it were a lab specimen. "It's very hearty, Mel," she commented, which was her way of calling it peasant food. She directed a relentless stream of subtly critical questions at Alice. "So this is what you do all day. It must be very tiring on your feet. And is this really a suitable environment for a young man like Thomas? All this grease in the air?" Alice answered each question with a tight, forced smile, feeling herself shrink back into the young, insecure woman they remembered. Jolene, Vera, and Mel hovered in the background, watching with a mixture of fury and concern, held back only by their promise to be on their best behavior. Frank was mostly silent, but his disapproval was communicated through his grim silence and the way he carefully wiped his fork with his napkin before each bite. The focus inevitably turned to Tommy. They peppered him with questions about his grades, his major, and his plans for the future. "Basketball is a fine hobby," Thomas Eleanor said, dabbing her lips with a napkin, "but one must have a practical plan for one's life. Your father, he had such potential before he got sidetracked." She glanced at Alice, the implication hanging in the air. The tension in the booth was so thick you could have cut it with one of Mel's steak knives. Alice felt the walls closing in the weight of their judgment, pressing down on her. She was losing the battle. She had invited them into her world, and they were systematically dismantling it piece by piece. Chapter 40, The Voice of the Hyatt Family. The final decisive blow came with dessert. Mel brought out a freshly baked apple pie, his piece de résistance. As they ate, Eleanor looked at Tommy with a thoughtful, proprietary expression. "Thomas," she said, setting down her fork, "your grandfather and I have been talking. We have a great deal of room in our home back in New Jersey. The schools there are excellent. We think it would be best if you came to live with us. You need a stable, respectable home, a place where you can focus on your future without distractions." The word distractions was aimed at Alice with the precision of a poisoned dart. It implied that she, her life, and her home were all impediments to her son's success. Something inside Alice snapped. It wasn't a loud, angry break, but a quiet, profound shift. The fear and insecurity that had held her captive for years simply fell away, replaced by the fierce, unshakable love of a mother. She placed her hands flat on the table and looked her mother-in-law directly in the eye. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear and carried a strength that silenced the entire diner. "No," she said. Eleanor looked taken aback. "I beg your pardon." "I said no," Alice repeated. "Tommy's home is here. With me." She took a breath. "I know you never approved of me, Eleanor. I know you think I ruined your son's life. And I have lived with the weight of that for a very long time, but I'm not going to let you do the same thing to my son." She gestured around the diner. This may not look like much to you. It's not a big house in a quiet suburb, but it is a good, respectable home. It's a home where Tommy has been surrounded by people who love him and support him unconditionally. He's learned more about hard work, loyalty, and family in this greasy spoon than he ever could in your perfect, sterile world. Her gaze softened as she looked at her son. "I am so incredibly proud of the man he is becoming. He is kind and confident, and he is not sidetracked. He is on his own path, and I will not let you or anyone else make him feel like it's not good enough." The diner was completely silent. Mel stood frozen by the grill, his spatula in midair. Then Tommy spoke, his voice steady and clear. He looked at his grandparents. "My mom is right," he said. "I love you both, but my home is here. My life is here." He reached across the table and took his mother's hand. Chapter 41, Ampere's Fragile Truce. The Hyatts were stunned. They had come expecting to find the same lost, grieving girl they had dismissed years ago. Instead, they had found a strong, confident woman, a matriarch in her own right, with a loyal family and a loving son standing firmly by her side. They had no response. The carefully constructed narrative they held about Alice and her life had been completely dismantled. They left shortly after the goodbyes, stiff and awkward. There were no apologies, no dramatic reconciliations. But as they walked to their RV, Frank Hyatt paused and turned back to Alice. The pot roast, he said, his voice quiet, was excellent. It was the smallest of olive branches, a barely perceptible crack in the wall of their disapproval. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. As the RV pulled out of the parking lot, Alice let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a decade. She turned to find the entire diner staff watching her, their faces filled with a fierce, protective pride. Vera was in tears. "Oh, Alice," she sobbed, that was more inspiring than Chapter 4 of The Tao of Positive Living. Jolene just smiled, a rare, genuine smile of pure admiration. "Well, I'll be," she drawled. "Looks like the kitten finally learned how to roar." Mel clapped Alice on the shoulder, his gruffness barely concealing his pride. "Not bad, Blondie," he said. "Not bad at all." That night, for the first time in years, Alice felt truly free. The ghosts of the past had been faced, not defeated, but put in their proper place. She looked around at the mismatched, beautiful family she had built, at the son who had become a fine young man, and at the diner that had been her sanctuary and her salvation. She was home, and for the first time she knew deep in her bones that it was more than enough.